everyone, and welcome to Ask Uncle Buck. I'm your host, Uncle Buck. You got big buck questions. I got big buck answers. So this week I got 3 questions, 2 of which I'm going to get through pretty quick. And the third one is a little more important. You might want to stick around for that one. So the first question comes from Eric Wong. Thanks for the question, Eric. He says, if you had to kill yourself but had an unlimited budget to do so, how would you do it? Well, that's a pretty good question. You see, here's what I would do. The first thing I would do is I would invest some money in inventing a currency of $1 billion bricks. So like a dollar bill or a coin, this brick would represent $1 billion of currency. And I would build an entire skyscraper out of these bricks, and then I would sign the building over to my children. And here's what I would do with the building, to my wife and my children. I would then, inside of this building, build a hypoxia chamber. Now, hypoxia is where you're breathing air that is oxygen deficient, and so your blood, even though you're breathing, your oxygen level in your blood gets too low, and then eventually you die from it. The effect of hypoxia is you start getting loopy and you feel really great. You're just having, man, it's like being drunk. You're just like, wee, I'm having a great time, and then eventually you just keel over dead. They've actually looked at using hypoxia as a method for killing death row inmates for executions, as opposed to other methods like lethal injection or electric chair or gas chambers or nooses or just a good old-fashioned bullet to the brain. So I would do a hypoxia chamber. Psych! I would die in battle fighting for the God Emperor. Deus Vult. Okay, so thanks for that question, Eric. The next one comes from Jason Hershey, who asked, why is it not okay to eat horse meat? Okay, I didn't know that it wasn't okay to eat horse meat. I know it's probably not the best thing to do. There's a couple of things that I can think of on this topic. One of which is during a time whenever people would potentially do something like eat horse meat, horse was probably your method of doing work. It was either your mode of travel or it was your farm implement. You'd use a horse to pull a thing, like a plow of some kind. Or you'd use a horse to pull a wagon. Whatever it was, the horse was what you used to get your work done. Matter of fact, there was a time in the Old West where stealing a man's horse was a capital offense. You could be killed for that in a hypoxia chamber. So, because they had those back then. So that was like tantamount to taking a man's livelihood. To steal a guy's horse, you were essentially killing him, because a horse was really expensive, for one. Most people, that was like the one horse was what they could afford. And without that horse, you couldn't do much work. So, yeah, that's probably why you don't eat your horse. Would be you're basically eating your livelihood. The other reason you wouldn't want to eat horse is I've heard horse meat doesn't taste that great. So, I mean, why? Why bother? Why bother? So, thank you, Jason Hershey, for that very, very interesting question. Next comes from Mark Humes, who asked a very serious question that I have a very serious answer for. He says, why do people from North Carolina love liver mush so much? It's disgusting. First off, I agree. I'm not a big fan of liver mush. A very, very interesting flavor. I'm not crazy about it myself, but it is very popular in North Carolina, which is where I'm from. So I would like to take this opportunity to give a very important history lesson, a North Carolina history lesson, because not a lot of people know about this. We're going to talk about the pork pudding war. Liver mush, obviously, being from pork, a pork byproduct. So listen, the pork pudding war, it's something that is not very well or widely known outside of North Carolina. So I did a little report, like a research paper, and I just want to read to you some notes about the pork pudding war. So it took place just after the Civil War, from September to December of 1868. I'll just start with the report. In July of 1861, North Carolina Governor Henry Toole Clark signs the Clark-Ham Act in an attempt to coerce union-friendly pig farmers, which were wildly successful. It was a very, very successful industry to be in, to fund the expansion of the Confederate Army through levied taxes. So the Clark-Ham Act, like in ham, like pork product ham, was a heavy tax levied against all popular forms of pork, such as ham, bacon, sausage, tenderloin, etc. In response to this, consumption of other pork products increased, including bologna, pork skin cracklings, chitterlings or chitlins as they're called, pig brains, pig's feet, fatback, and of course liver mush, which at the time was called pork pudding. So to close the loophole and shutter the creative pig farmers, Clark went on in November to sign the Pork Pudding Act, which increased the taxes that were already there on pork products and included the now popular byproducts such as pork pudding. This act was particularly unpopular among slaves and freed African Americans, as many were either pork farmers themselves, the freed ones, or they were slaves on pork farms, and that was where their master got their livelihood. And so these pork byproducts were, and then like poor people also, you know, you're going to eat the byproducts, the cheaper byproducts, and now those are expensive. So let's see here. With taxes being a heavy burden, most had grown an affinity for pork pudding in particular. After the Civil War in August 1868, Governor William Woods Holden attempted to repeal both the Clark-Ham Act and the Pork Pudding Act. Confederate sympathists were angered by this decision and formed a rebellion led by B. Robert McGill that became known as the Pork Pudding Rebellion. You see? Most people don't know this. The Pork Pudding Rebellion. The pork pudding rebels went on a rampage across 5 counties, my county included, burning pork farms, slaughtering livestock, and intimidating pork farmers. Within days, dispossessed pig farmers organized into a counter-rebellion known as the Hambone Boys, led by Andrew T. Whitaker, who used hit-and-run tactics to hinder the pork pudding rebels. They would like hide in the woods, pop out, bang, bang, and then they'd run away. They call the Highland Way. All right. Eventually, the United States Army was called out to put down the rebellion, lest it spread and begin a second wave of secession. From September to December, several bloody skirmishes were fought until McGill was captured alive and surrendered. On December 17th, he was captured by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert James Neese during the Battle of Love Valley. I've been to Love Valley. According to legend, McGill's diet during the campaign had consisted entirely of meats taken from the pork farms destroyed by the rebellion. So he was going around, he'd burn your farm, and then he'd slaughter your pigs, and then he'd make some bacon or some whatever. By the fire of your burning barn. Insult to injury. That's what he did. The guy was a prick, this McGill guy. All right, let's see. Where did I get to? He was said to be fond of pork pudding in particular, and that every meal for weeks consisted of either boiled potatoes or fried okra or collard greens, and then pork pudding. As a result, and it's a very, very rich meat. If you've ever had liver mush, it's very, very rich. So it's like an organ meat. As a result, by the time of the Battle of Love Valley, McGill suffered from chronic constipation as well as gout in his left foot, which prevented him from traveling quickly. It is said that this very infirmity is why he was so easily captured, as he was unable to flee when the tide of the battle turned. To celebrate, North Carolina residents created a holiday on the day of the surrender to commemorate the end of the Pork Pudding War. Pork Pudding Day, which is a wonderful day, and of course nobody outside of North Carolina celebrates this. Very few outside of North Carolina. We can't keep it hush-hush, but I'm breaking the seal on it. Pork Pudding Day is celebrated annually on December 17th and is characterized by feasts of all pork products, but especially pork pudding, which today we call liver mush. So there you have it, Mark Humes. That's why we love liver mush so much in North Carolina, because of the Pork Pudding War. It's very near and dear to us culturally, and especially with the African American population, because they were the most dispossessed of their pork farms during the Pork Pudding War. And so, for the means of diversity and solidarity, we all partake of Pork Pudding Day on December 17th. And if you're watching this video when this December comes up, I'd like you to join us for Pork Pudding Day on December 17th. You're supposed to dress up in your best Civil War era attire, not necessarily the uniforms, but the attire of that era, and you just feast on pork products, and we'll all be fat and happy together. So this has been Ask Uncle Buck. I've been your host, Uncle Buck. You had big buck questions. I had big buck answers. I'll catch you next time. Bub.